It began with a sound, not a shout that shatters the silence, but a whisper that poisons it. The flight was early, a small mercy, I thought, a few extra hours to surprise him, to feel his arms around me after 3 long days away. The house was still when I let myself in, holding its breath, as if it knew a secret it was reluctant to share. I left my suitcase by the door, slipping off my heels to walk silently across the cool hardwood floors I had chosen myself. Every part of this house was a piece of me, a testament to my love, my career, my life with him. The scent of lavender and clean linen, my signature, hung in the air, a comforting lie. I smiled, imagining his face when I'd slip into bed beside him. But as I climbed the stairs, my hand gliding along the smooth oak railing, another sound met me. A soft, rhythmic creak from our bedroom, a sound I knew well, but one that should not have existed in the empty stillness of a weekday afternoon. My heart began a frantic, painful beat against my ribs, and then I heard it, the whisper I spoke of. A faint, breathy moan, a sound of pleasure so deeply felt it had to be suppressed. It was the sound of a secret. The door was ajar, a sliver of golden light spilling into the darkened hallway, a cruel invitation. I moved toward it not of my own will but pulled by some morbid gravity. I peered through the crack, my breath caught in my throat, my world tilting on its axis. I recognized the rhythm before I recognized the act, the slow, deliberate cadence of my husband's body, his bare back slick with a faint sheen of sweat, the muscles I knew so well, contracting and releasing. It was a dance I knew intimately, a rhythm that had once been mine alone. But the body beneath him was not mine. The hair, spread across my pillow like a halo of spun gold, was not mine. It belonged to Bella. Her fingers were digging into his shoulders, her head thrown back, her lips parted in that silent, breathless ecstasy. My name is Eleanor. That man, the one moving with such primal focus, is my husband, Liam. And the woman beneath him, the source of that soft, strangled sound of pleasure, she was our nanny. The girl I had trusted with my son, with the keys to my home, with the fabric of my life. I am an architect. I build things. I create spaces meant for living, for loving, for safety. And in that single horrifying moment, I understood that my own home, the sanctuary I had designed with my own 2 hands, had become a stage for the most profound betrayal. The image is seared into my mind, of course, but it is the sound, that quiet, breathless gasp of stolen pleasure that has become the true ghost in these walls. It is the sound that now plays on a loop in the silence, long after the performance was over. Before the sound, there was the silence. A different kind of silence, not the empty, screaming void I live in now, but a pristine architectural silence. It was the silence of success, the quiet hum of a life perfectly constructed. Our house was its cathedral. I designed it myself, of course. Every clean line, every vast pane of glass that invited the Massachusetts woods inside while keeping the world at bay, was a line drawn from my own mind. It was a modern masterpiece of steel, glass, and pale stone, featured in magazines, praised for its seamless integration of form and function. To our friends, to our families, it was the ultimate symbol of everything we had achieved. Eleanor and Liam, the architect and the analyst. The power couple with the perfect son, Leo, and the perfect home that looked more like a gallery than a place where a child's sticky fingerprints should be. It was a monument to our shared ambition, a beautiful, sterile fortress we had built together. I look back at the photos from that time, and I see the lie so clearly now. There we are, at a charity gala, Liam's hand resting possessively on the small of my back, my smile practiced and bright. There we are, on the deck of our home, laughing as we grill steaks, the setting sun glinting off our wine glasses. It's all there, the entire performance. The V-neck sweater that showed off his gym-toned chest, the silk dress that skimmed my body, the carefully chosen props of a happy life. We looked like a marketing campaign for marital bliss. But a photograph only captures a fraction of a second. It doesn't capture the silence in the car on the way home, or the fact that our laughter on the deck died the moment the camera was put away. It doesn't show that the hand on my back felt more like a brand of ownership than a lover's caress. Our story hadn't always been written in this cold, formal language. I remember the early days in a cramped Boston apartment that always smelled of garlic from the restaurant downstairs. We were fueled by cheap pizza, cheaper wine, and a ferocious, all-consuming desire for each other and for the future. We would talk for hours, our bodies tangled in the sheets, my head on his chest. We planned everything. His ascent in the financial world, my dream of starting my own firm. We were a team, a single unit pushing against the world. He was my greatest champion, and I was his. The house, this very house, was born in those late-night whispers. It was our promised land. But the tragic irony is that in the process of building our monument, we lost the faith it was meant to celebrate. The shift was gradual, a slow erosion rather than a sudden earthquake. Our conversations began to change. They became logistical, transactional. The pillow talk of dreams and desires was replaced by the morning briefings of schedules and responsibilities. "Did you call the plumber about the guest bathroom?" he'd ask, nodding his tie. "Leo has soccer at 4. I have a late meeting with the board. Can you pick him up?" I'd reply, scrolling through emails on my phone. We were no longer lovers, but co-managers of the small corporation that was our family. Our intimacy followed the same sad decline. It became a scheduled event, something to be checked off a list between a client dinner and an early morning flight. It lost its spontaneity, its fire. Making love in our king-sized bed, surrounded by cool gray walls and minimalist art, felt like a duty performed in a museum. His touch, once a spark that could ignite my entire body, became predictable, almost clinical. His body was familiar, but the man inside it felt miles away. We would move together, our breaths mingling in the dark, but our minds were elsewhere. I would think about the structural integrity of the Halcyon Tower project, and he, I now realize, was probably just thinking of release, of an escape from the crushing loneliness of sleeping next to a woman who was more passionate about concrete and steel than she was about him. I must be honest about my own complicity. I retreated into my work. The Halcyon Tower was my magnum opus, a skyscraper that would redefine the city's skyline. It demanded all of me, and I gave it willingly. The scent of blueprints and fresh ink was more intoxicating to me than Liam's cologne. The thrill of solving a complex design problem gave me a rush that our sterile bedroom no longer could. I worked late, fueled by caffeine and ambition, finding more intimacy in the quiet hum of my computer than in my husband's arms. I told myself it was for us, for our future. I told myself that this sacrifice was temporary, but I was lying. I was building a new fortress, one made of professional success, and I was locking myself inside it, leaving Liam and Leo on the other side of the moat. I see him so clearly in my memory, a ghost haunting the perfect rooms I designed. I'd come home late, exhausted, to find him sitting alone in the vast living room, the blue light of the television flickering across his face. He'd look up, a hopeful spark in his eyes, wanting to connect, to talk about something other than schedules. "How was your day?" he'd ask. And I, with the arrogance of the preoccupied, would give him a tired, one-word answer, "Fine." I would brush past him, my mind still at the office, already thinking about the next day's challenges. I missed the loneliness in his eyes, mistaking it for fatigue. I failed to see that while I was building a legacy of glass and steel for the world to admire, the man I loved was slowly starving for a simple, human connection right beside me. He was starving for attention, for admiration, for the feeling that he was more than just the other name on the mortgage. He wanted to be seen, and I was looking right through him, my gaze fixed on the skyline of my own ambition. We had created the perfect life, but we had forgotten to live in it. We had built the perfect house, but we had forgotten to make it a home. It was a beautiful, empty stage, impeccably lit and artfully designed. All it needed was a new actress to step into the spotlight. And, though I didn't know it at the time, we were about to hold the audition. The decision to hire a live-in nanny was born from the cold, hard logic of ambition. The Halcyon Tower project was no longer just a job. It was a living entity, a behemoth that consumed my days and haunted my nights. It demanded my presence at dawn for site inspections and kept me chained to my desk until midnight, refining details that no one but me would ever notice. Liam at first had been supportive, but his support was beginning to fray into a quiet resentment that manifested in sighs and long silences. Leo was feeling it too. He started acting out in small ways, a painting smeared on the wall, a sudden tantrum over nothing. He needed consistency, a warm and constant presence that his mother, the celebrated architect, was failing to provide. One evening, over a dinner of takeout eaten straight from the cartons, I presented the idea to Liam. A live-in nanny, someone who could be there for Leo, a seamless part of our home's machinery. I framed it as a solution for our son, but in my heart, I knew it was an abdication. I was hiring a replacement for myself. Liam agreed almost immediately, his face showing a flicker of something I mistook for relief. "Whatever you think is best, Ellie," he said, his eyes on his phone. "Whatever makes things easier." We interviewed a dozen candidates. They paraded through our home, their resumes crisp, their references impeccable. There was a stern, older woman who seemed to view child-rearing as a military campaign. There was a bubbly, over-caffeinated girl who spoke only in child development jargon. They were all qualified, all perfectly capable, but they felt like outsiders, like sterile additions to our already sterile home. They were more employees, and the thought of their professional, detached presence wandering these halls felt colder than the silence itself. None of them felt right. They were solutions, yes, but they had no soul. I was about to give up, to resign myself to a state of perpetual guilt and exhaustion when the agency sent over one last profile. Isabella, 22 years old, from a small town upstate. Her photo was simple, a candid snapshot where she was smiling, her head tilted slightly. There was a warmth in her eyes that the others lacked. I agreed to see her. The doorbell rang at precisely 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. I opened the door, and the world shifted, just a fraction of an inch. The hallway behind me was all cool tones, gray stone and white walls, but the girl standing on my doorstep seemed to be bathed in a golden light of her own making. It was Isabella. Bella. She was wearing simple blue jeans, worn at the knees, and a plain white t-shirt. No pretense, no power suit. Her blonde hair was not the icy, calculated blonde of the city, but a natural, sun-streaked gold, falling in soft waves past her shoulders. My first thought, the practical, maternal one, was that she looked kind. Her face was open, her large hazel eyes holding a hint of shyness that I found endearing. Her lips, unpainted and full, were quirked in a nervous smile. She looked like a girl you could trust. She looked like the ghost of my own youth, a memory of a time before life became a series of calculated angles and stress-tested materials. I saw a caretaker, a companion for my son, a solution to my impossible schedule. I saw an angel. It is only now, in the cruel clarity of hindsight, that I understand Liam did not see an angel. He saw a temptation made of flesh and blood. He walked into the living room as I was showing her in, and the air crackled. I felt it, even then, but I dismissed it. He was always charming with new people, but this was different. I watched him take her in, and I now know exactly what he saw. He didn't just see a simple white t-shirt. He saw the thin veil of soft cotton that did nothing to hide the proud, youthful swell of her chest. Her breasts were not large or ostentatious, but they were perfect, a pair of high, firm, snow-capped peaks that rose and fell with each nervous breath she took. They were the breasts of a girl on the cusp of womanhood, full of life and promise. A stark contrast to the familiar, comfortable body of a wife and mother he had known for a decade. He saw the way the shirt pulled ever so slightly across them, the faint outline of a simple lace bra beneath, a detail so intimate it felt like a violation just to notice. And I know he saw the curve of her waist, the delicate indentation where the soft fabric of her shirt met the worn denim of her jeans. It was a line that invited a hand to rest there, to explore the space between innocence and experience. Her jeans, though not aggressively tight, were a testament to the casual power of her youth. They clung to a pair of perfectly rounded hips and sculpted a backside so flawlessly shaped it seemed crafted by a master artist. It was the kind of effortless, fertile curve that nature designs and men instinctively worship, a perfect peach that promised sweetness and succor. He saw the long, elegant line of her throat, exposed by the scoop of her shirt, and the way a few stray strands of her golden hair rested against the soft skin of her neck. He saw her lips, full and slightly parted as she listened to my questions, and I know he imagined how they would feel, how they would taste. He was not seeing a potential employee. He was seeing a woman in all her unadorned, devastating glory. During the interview, his transformation was subtle but total. The weary, distracted man who usually grunted responses from behind a laptop screen was gone. In his place was the Liam I hadn't seen in years. He sat forward, he smiled, he engaged. He asked her about her hometown, her hobbies, her dreams. His voice was deeper, laced with a warmth that was usually reserved for closing a major deal. I remember one moment with painful precision. He told a silly, self-deprecating joke, and Bella laughed. It wasn't a polite titter. It was a genuine musical laugh that filled the sterile room with life. Her head tilted back, her eyes sparkled, and for a fraction of a second, her gaze locked with his. The look that passed between them was electric. It was too long, too deep, too familiar for two people who had just met. At the time, I registered it as good chemistry. I thought, he likes her. This is good. It will make this transition easier for everyone. I was a fool. I was watching a predator identify his prey, and I was smiling, pleased that they were getting along. After she left, the decision was instantaneous. "She's the one, Ellie," Liam said, his voice full of an enthusiasm I hadn't heard in years. "She's perfect. For Leo. She has a warmth about her." I agreed, flooded with a sense of profound relief. The problem was solved. The final piece of our perfect life's machinery had been found. I could finally give the Halcyon Tower my undivided attention, knowing my son was in the care of a warm, kind, trustworthy girl. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly, a deep and dreamless sleep. I felt a sense of peace, a feeling of control, a belief that I had finally solved the complex equation of my life, balancing work and family in perfect harmony. I didn't realize I had not solved anything. I had just welcomed the beautiful, smiling variable that would burn the entire formula to the ground. In the beginning, Bella's presence was a balm, a soothing oil on the turbulent waters of my life. The house, which had grown so silent and vast, was suddenly filled with the sound of Leo's happy chatter and Bella's gentle laughter. The oppressive guilt that had become my constant companion began to recede. I could finally immerse myself in the complex world of the Halcyon Tower, poring over blueprints and negotiating with contractors, with the peace of mind that came from knowing my son was not just being supervised, but was being nurtured. Bella was, in every measurable way, perfect. She remembered Leo's favorite snacks. She invented magical games. She read to him with a storyteller's flair that I could never muster. She brought a warmth and a life to the cold, minimalist spaces I had designed, a life I had failed to provide. For a few weeks, I existed in a state of grateful denial, telling myself that I had made the wisest decision of my life. The house was running like a well-oiled machine, and I was free. I was free to work, to create, to succeed. I did not yet understand that the price of this freedom was my own husband. The first crack was almost invisible, a hairline fracture in the smooth facade of our new domesticity. It was a glance. I was in the kitchen, pouring my third coffee of the day, my mind 1,000 miles away, wrestling with a problem involving the tensile strength of steel. Liam and Bella were at the large island, ostensibly helping Leo with a finger painting project. I heard Liam say something, a quiet comment about the mess of blue paint on Leo's nose, and Bella looked up at him and smiled. It was a sweet, open smile. But Liam's expression in return was not merely friendly. It was a look of unguarded, profound fascination. It was the way a man looks at a piece of art that has completely captivated him, a look of quiet reverence and deep, unspoken longing. It lasted only a second, maybe two, but in that sliver of time, the air in the room became heavy, charged with a silent current of energy that had nothing to do with finger paint. He held her gaze just a moment too long before she, blushing slightly, looked back down at Leo. I felt a small, cold knot form in my stomach, but I dismissed it almost as quickly as it appeared. I'm tired, I told myself. The architect in me demanding evidence, data, proof. A look is not evidence. He's just grateful. We're all just grateful. I took my coffee and retreated to the sterile safety of my study. A week later, the crack widened. I was walking down the hallway, my mind still cluttered with building codes, when I heard a burst of shared laughter from the living room. It was not the polite, restrained laughter of an employer and his employee. It was uninhibited, conspiratorial, the sound of a secret joke shared between equals. I paused in the shadows of the doorway, an unseen observer in my own home. Liam and Bella were on the floor with Leo, surrounded by a chaotic explosion of Lego bricks. Liam had put a small red brick on his nose, mimicking Leo, and Bella was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes, her hand covering her mouth. For a brief, dizzying moment, they looked like a family. A young, happy family bathed in the warm light of the afternoon sun. Leo was the center of their world, but they were the center of each other's. In L, I felt a pang of something sharp and ugly in my chest. It was jealousy. I was jealous of their ease, their joy, their shared moment of silly, uncomplicated happiness. I felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of a life that was moving on without me. I quickly turned and walked away before they could see me, the sound of their laughter following me down the hall. It's for Leo, I chanted in my mind, a desperate mantra. A happy environment is good for Leo. I am being selfish. I am being paranoid. The signs kept coming, small tremors before the earthquake. There was the casual touch that wasn't casual at all. We were all in the kitchen one evening, a rare moment when I had finished work at a reasonable hour. Bella was reaching into a high cabinet for a glass, standing on her tiptoes, her white t-shirt riding up to expose a sliver of the soft, pale skin of her lower back. Liam, seemingly without thinking, reached out and placed a hand on that exact spot, steadying her. "Here, let me," he said, his voice a low murmur. His hand remained there for a heartbeat too long after she had the glass, his fingers spread against her skin. It was not a paternal or a friendly touch. It was possessive, intimate. I saw Bella's body stiffen slightly, a quick intake of breath. I saw the way Liam's thumb moved, a tiny, almost imperceptible caress, before he pulled his hand away as if burned. They both pretended it hadn't happened. They didn't look at each other. They didn't look at me, but I had seen it. The knot in my stomach tightened, cold and hard as a stone. My mind became a courtroom where I was both prosecutor and defense attorney. Intuition, the prosecutor, presented the evidence, the lingering glances, the secret laughter, the charged touches. "He is falling for her," it screamed. "Open your eyes." But logic, the defense attorney, was formidable. "You have no proof," it argued calmly. "You have fleeting moments, ambiguous interactions. You are a stressed, overworked, and perhaps insecure woman who is projecting her own guilt onto them. Are you so arrogant to think that no one can be happy in this house unless you are the source of that happiness?" I accused myself of being a cliché, the jealous, aging wife threatened by the vibrant youth of the hired help. The shame of that thought was almost as painful as the suspicion itself. So I chose to believe the logical part of my brain. I chose to believe I was imagining it all. It was easier. Believing the truth would mean I would have to do something about it, and I was simply too tired to fight another battle. The house itself seemed to collude in the deception. It became a divided territory. My study was the cold zone, a quiet, sterile bubble of order and control, filled with the scent of paper and ambition. The rest of the house, the kitchen, the living room, the garden, became the warm zone, a territory that belonged to them. I would emerge from my office after hours of intense focus, feeling like a diver surfacing from the deep, and I would be met with the sounds and smells of their life. The aroma of cookies Bella had baked with Leo, the sound of Liam's deep voice reading a story, the faint scent of her coconut shampoo lingering in the air. These were the signs of a happy, thriving home, and yet they made me feel like a stranger. The heart of my house had relocated, and its new chambers were places where I was no longer a resident, only a visitor. I was the ghost now, and they were the ones who were truly alive. To understand how a man I had loved for 15 years, a good man, a man who cried at our son's kindergarten graduation, could unravel the very fabric of our lives, I have to do the unthinkable. I have to step inside his skin. I have to close my eyes and try to see the world as he saw it in those months, to reconstruct his thoughts and feel his desires, piece by painful, suffocating piece. I have to give the monster a human face, because for so long, that face was the one I kissed goodnight. This is not an excuse for him. It is an autopsy. An attempt to understand the pathology of a betrayal that started not with a touch, but with a feeling, the feeling of being utterly, completely invisible. From his perspective, I imagine our beautiful house felt like an elegant, empty museum where he was the silent, underappreciated curator. He would come home from a grueling day of navigating the abstract, brutal world of finance and walk into a home that was pristine, quiet, and cold. I, his wife, was a phantom. I was either physically absent, my car already gone before he woke, or mentally cloistered in my study, a high priestess in the temple of my own ambition. Our conversations were check-ins, status reports on the project that was our life. The passion, the curiosity, the simple act of looking at each other and truly seeing one another that had died long ago. He was the king of a magnificent, empty castle, and I was the ghost in the machine, the brilliant, driven specter whose success he helped to fund but could no longer emotionally reach. He was proud of me, I know he was, but he was also eclipsed by me. I was the sun, and he was the planet, kept in a steady, predictable orbit by my gravity, denied any light or warmth of his own. Then, Bella arrived, and for the first time in years, someone in his own home looked at him. When he spoke, she didn't nod distractedly while scrolling through her phone, the way I did. She would turn her body towards him, her large hazel eyes fixed on his, and she would listen. She would actually listen. He would tell a story about his day, a boring anecdote about market fluctuations he wouldn't have even bothered to tell me, and she would listen with a rapt attention that made him feel fascinating. She'd ask questions, simple questions, that showed she was engaged. Is that hard to do? You must be so smart to understand all that. To a man starving in a desert of indifference, these small drops of admiration were a life-sustaining oasis. He was no longer just the provider, the co-manager, the father. In her eyes, he was Liam. He was a man. Interesting, intelligent, funny. She laughed at his jokes. She noticed when he got a haircut. She complimented the meals he'd sometimes grill on the weekends. She was a mirror, reflecting back a version of himself he thought had died years ago. The charming, capable man who could command a woman's full, undivided attention. This emotional validation was the kindling, but raw physical desire was the spark. His obsession, I now realize, was a total sensory assault. It began with her scent. She smelled of coconut and vanilla, a simple, sweet scent that was nothing like the complex, expensive perfumes I wore. It was the scent of youth, of sunshine, of uncomplicated sweetness. It began to permeate the house. He would pick up a throw pillow from the sofa where she'd been sitting, and her fragrance would cling to it, a ghostly, intoxicating presence. He'd walk past the laundry room, and the scent of her clothes, mingled with fresh detergent, would be a subtle, constant reminder of her physical reality in his home. It was an invasion, a sweet poison that he began to crave. His eyes started to follow her, a secret, private obsession he told himself was harmless. He would be at his laptop in the kitchen, pretending to work, but he would be watching her. He watched the way she moved as she went about her day, with an unconscious, feline grace that I, with my deliberate, purposeful strides, had long since lost. He watched her as she bent to pick up Leo's scattered toys from the floor. He saw the way her jeans pulled taut across the perfect, heart-shaped curve of her backside, the way the muscles in her long legs engaged. He would memorize the sight, replaying it in his mind later, a private film reel of forbidden images. He watched her as she stood on her tiptoes, reaching for a cereal box on a high shelf. He saw the hem of her t-shirt lift, exposing a tantalizing sliver of pale, smooth skin above the waistband of her jeans. He saw the gentle feminine curve of her side, the swell of her breast pressing against the soft cotton as she stretched. He became a connoisseur of these stolen moments, these slivers of her body offered up to him by the innocence of her everyday movements. He began to build a narrative in his head, a fragile architecture of self-deception. Eleanor doesn't need me, the story went. Not really. She has her work, her tower. Our marriage is a partnership, an efficient, loveless arrangement. He would lie in bed next to me at night, my back turned to him as I slept the sleep of the exhausted, and he would feel a profound, aching loneliness. And in that loneliness, the image of Bella would appear, the memory of her laugh, the scent of her hair, the sight of her body moving through his home. This is just a fantasy, he would tell himself. It's harmless. It makes me feel alive. It makes the emptiness of this big, cold house more bearable. I'm a good father. I'm a good provider. I deserve this one small, secret thing for myself. He was building a case for his own betrayal, brick by rationalizing brick, convincing himself that the crime was not in the desire, but only in the act. But desire, once it takes root, is a living thing. It grows, and it needs to be fed. The fantasy was no longer enough. The seed of desire had been planted in the fertile ground of his loneliness and watered daily by my neglect, and it was beginning to sprout, pushing its way through the cracks in our perfect facade, reaching desperately for the light. I flew to Chicago on a Tuesday morning. The air was crisp and full of the promise of autumn, a season of change I had always loved. My trip was for the Halcyon Tower, of course, a crucial 3-day summit with the structural engineers and the primary investors. I remember the kiss Liam gave me at the door. It was brief, dry, the perfunctory peck of a long-married spouse. His mind was already on his first conference call, and mine was on the presentation slides loaded onto my laptop. Be good, I told him, my hand on his cheek for a moment. You and Leo have fun. I remember Bella standing in the background, a respectful distance away, holding Leo's hand. She gave me a small, shy smile. We will, Eleanor. Don't worry about a thing. And I believed her. I walked out of my home and into a taxi, a successful architect, a wife, a mother, delegating my life so that I could go and build a legacy. I felt the familiar, addictive hum of purpose. I didn't feel the tremor of the ground beneath my feet, the first sign that the foundations were about to give way. I imagine the first night they were alone was heavy with unspoken things. After Leo was tucked into bed, the great, silent house would have wrapped itself around them. It was a space I had designed for a family of 3, and with me gone, its emptiness would have been a palpable presence. I see them in my mind, moving through the rooms like ghosts, careful not to occupy the same space for too long. He would be in his office, pretending to work. She would be in her room, pretending to read. The silence between them wasn't peaceful. It was a tightly stretched wire, vibrating with all the lingering glances, the shared laughter, the almost touches of the past weeks. It was a silence pregnant with possibility, and they were both holding their breath, waiting to see what it would birth. The second night, the wire snapped. It began, as so many betrayals do, with a bottle of wine. I can picture the scene with a clarity that sickens me. Leo is asleep upstairs, his breathing a soft, innocent rhythm in the quiet house. Liam comes down from his office, restless, unable to focus. He finds Bella in the living room, curled up on the vast white sofa, a book open in her lap, but her eyes staring into the distance. The air is still thick with that awkward tension. He hesitates, then speaks, his voice too loud in the stillness. I was going to open a bottle of red. Would you? Would you like a glass? It's a question, but it's also a permission slip, an invitation to cross a line together. She looks up at him, her eyes wide in the lamplight. She should have said no. She should have made an excuse and fled to the safety of her room. But she was 22 and lonely, and the most powerful man in her small world was offering her a kindness. She said yes. I can see him pulling the cork, the satisfying pop echoing in the cavernous room, a sound of release. He pours 2 glasses of the expensive Cabernet we were saving for a special occasion. He hands one to her, their fingers brushing for a second too long. They sit, not too close, on opposite ends of the sofa that I spent a month choosing. The wine works its slow, insidious magic. It warms their blood and loosens their tongues. The conversation starts simply, about Leo, about the house. But then, it deepens. The wine unties the knots of their secrets. She tells him things I never knew, about her father who left, about a mother who struggled, about feeling like she was adrift in the world, searching for a place to feel safe. She's no longer just a beautiful, desirable body. She is a story of vulnerability, a wounded bird. And he, my husband, sees his chance to be the hero. He listens, truly listens, and in turn, he offers up his own pain. He speaks of his loneliness, not in a way that blames me, but in a way that paints him as a tragic, solitary figure. He talks about feeling like a passenger in a life he was supposed to be driving. They are no longer an employer and his nanny. They are two lonely people, adrift in a beautiful, empty house, finding a fragile, temporary harbor in each other's sympathetic gaze. The confession leads to a moment of charged silence. The air is thick with wine and unspoken words. He reaches across the space between them and covers her hand with his. A gesture of comfort, he tells himself. A gesture of solidarity. But his thumb begins to move, tracing small, soothing circles on the back of her hand. Her breath catches. She doesn't pull away. He leans closer, the scent of her skin, of wine, of that sweet coconut shampoo, filling his senses, overwhelming his last shred of resolve. Liam, she whispers, her voice barely audible. We can't. This is wrong, Eleanor. My name a ghost at their sordid little feast. I know, he murmurs, his face just inches from hers, his voice thick with a need that has been starving for years. I know, but just for a minute. Just for a minute, I need to not feel so alone. And then he closes the distance, and their lips meet. The first kiss is not elegant or passionate. It is a clumsy, desperate collision of guilt and hunger. Her initial resistance is real, a brief stiffening, a weak attempt to turn her head, but his desperation is a current too strong to fight. His hand moves from hers to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in the soft, golden silk of her hair, pulling her closer, deepening the kiss. And then, she surrenders. Her body softens, her lips part, and a small, soft moan escapes her throat, a sound of defeat and desire all at once. The kiss becomes frantic, voracious. His other hand finds the curve of her waist, pulling her body against his. They are a tangle of limbs on my white sofa. Clothes become an intolerable barrier. He fumbles with the buttons of her blouse, his hands shaking. She helps him, her own fingers working at the buckle of his belt. It is not an act of love. It is an act of mutual desperation. His hands finally find her skin. He pushes aside the lace of her bra, freeing her breasts, those perfect, snowy peaks he has fantasized about for weeks. He lowers his head, his mouth closing over a hardened nipple, and she gasps, her back arching, her hands clutching at his hair. God, Bella. He groans against her skin, his voice raw with a pleasure so acute it's almost pain. You are so beautiful. I've wanted this for so long. He pushes her jeans down over her hips, his fingers finding the damp heat between her legs. She is ready for him. She is more than ready. He enters her with a single desperate thrust, and they both cry out, a sound that is swallowed by the thick carpets and the expensive drapery. Their rhythm is frantic, a clumsy, urgent dance of release. It's not about pleasure, it's about annihilation, about obliterating the loneliness and the guilt in a blaze of pure physical sensation. It is over almost as quickly as it began, a frantic, shuddering climax that leaves them slick with sweat and panting in the dim light, the full weight of what they have just done crashing down upon them. In the sudden, ringing silence, I see them, entangled in their sin on my sofa, in my home. It was not just an act of passion, it was an act of demolition. And I was 3,000 miles away, drafting the blueprints for a beautiful new tower, while the foundations of my own life were being reduced to rubble. The morning after is a landscape of silent, jagged regret. I have replayed this scene in my mind 1,000 times, trying to feel the texture of their guilt. I imagine the sun, my unforgiving sun, streaming through the vast windows of the living room, illuminating the scene of the crime. The white sofa, the hastily discarded wine glasses, the faint, cloying scent of sex and stale Cabernet hanging in the air. I see Liam waking first on that couch, the thrill of the night dissolving into the cold, harsh light of day, a profound self-loathing settling deep in his bones. And I see Bella, tangled in a throw blanket, her face pale, her youthful innocence bruised by the reality of what she had done. The awkwardness between them must have been a physical presence, a third person in the room. I picture them at the breakfast table with Leo, a forced, brittle pantomime of normalcy. Every word is a minefield. Every glance is a potential explosion. They are two strangers, bound by a shameful secret so immense it suffocates the air between them. They cannot look at each other, because to do so would be to see their own weakness, their own betrayal, reflected in the other's eyes. For a full day, they exist in this state of suspended animation, this cold war of guilt. A silent, unspoken pact is formed. We will never speak of this again. If we don't give it a name, perhaps it will cease to exist. Perhaps it can be buried like a bad dream. But the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Liam would go to his office, but he wouldn't be able to work. The memory of her soft skin, the ghost of her scent on his shirt, the sound of her breathless gasp, it would all be more real than the stock market tickers on his screen. He was haunted, not just by the guilt, but by the memory of the release. For one brief, explosive moment, he hadn't been invisible. He had been a god. The memory of that power, that feeling of being truly, primally wanted, is a drug more potent than any remorse. The guilt was real, but the craving, he would discover, was stronger. He had tasted a forbidden fruit, and now he was consumed by a venomous, insatiable hunger. The intoxication was beginning to take hold. The risk, the very wrongness of their act, became an intoxicating part of the memory. It was a secret fire that warmed him in the cold emptiness of my absence. He started to seek her out, not for conversation, but for proximity. A walk through the kitchen, while she was cooking, his arm brushing against her back as he passed. Standing too close behind her as she loaded the dishwasher so he could inhale the scent of her hair. These were tiny transgressions, probes to see if the electricity was still there. And it was. He could feel it in the way she would flinch, the sharp intake of her breath, the way she refused to meet his eyes but didn't move away. He knew, in that feral, instinctual way a man knows, that her guilt was also warring with a dark, burgeoning desire. The first time had been a fall from grace. The second time, he was realizing, would be a deliberate, willing leap into the abyss. The moment came on my last night away. The house was settled, Leo fast asleep. The quiet that had been so oppressive 2 nights ago was now humming with a different kind of energy. Anticipation. Bella was in the laundry room, a small, sterile space tucked away at the back of the house, bathed in the harsh, unflattering light of a single fluorescent bulb. She was folding a basket of Leo's clothes, a mundane, domestic task. Liam found her there. I imagine he told himself he was just going to get a glass of water, that he just wanted to talk, to clear the air. But they both knew that was a lie. He walked in and closed the door behind him, the soft click of the latch echoing like a gunshot. She looked up, her hands frozen above a tiny t-shirt. "Liam, no," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't. Leo is right upstairs." Her protest was a flickering candle against the hurricane of his need. "He's asleep," he said, his voice low and rough, as he closed the space between them. "And we're just talking." He backed her against the steady, humming vibration of the washing machine. He didn't kiss her at first. He just looked at her, his eyes dark with a hunger that was almost frightening. He lifted a hand, tucking a stray piece of her golden hair behind her ear, his fingers deliberately tracing the soft shell of it, sending a shiver through her. "Tell me you haven't been thinking about it," he murmured, his breath warm against her cheek. "Tell me you didn't feel what I felt." She couldn't answer. She could only shake her head, a denial that was also a confession. And that was all the invitation he needed. His mouth crashed down on hers, and this kiss was nothing like the first. There was no hesitation, no guilt. It was pure, predatory hunger. Her token resistance melted in an instant. Her arms, against her will, snaked around his neck, pulling him closer. He pushed the basket of clean laundry to the floor, the tiny, folded clothes scattering around their feet, and lifted her effortlessly onto the top of the machine. The cool metal was a shock against her skin. "I can't stop thinking about you, Bella," he groaned, his hands pushing up her sweater, fumbling with the clasp of her bra. It was a simple, pink lace thing, the kind of lingerie a young girl wears, a pathetic, pretty shield against the raw, adult lust he was unleashing. His mouth found her breast, his tongue and teeth teasing the nipple into a hard, aching peak. She gasped, her head thrown back against the wall, her body vibrating with the rhythm of the machine beneath her. "Oh, Liam, you feel so good. Please." The words were tumbling out of her now, a torrent of need. He pulled at her jeans, pushing them and her lacy panties down in one rough, impatient motion. "You're so wet," he whispered, his fingers finding her, exploring her, making her gasp. "God, you're soaking for me, aren't you?" He positioned himself between her legs, his own need pressing against her. "I'm going to come, Liam," she panted, her eyes glazed with pleasure and panic. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice thick with a dark authority. He entered her, and this time there was no gentleness, only a hard, driving rhythm that matched the hum of the machine. Her legs wrapped around his waist, pulling him deeper. The sounds in the small room were a symphony of sin. The thrum of the dryer, the slap of their skin, her breathless moans, his guttural groans. It was raw, it was reckless, it was an act of pure, animalistic lust, stripped of all emotion except for a desperate, all-consuming need. The climax was a convulsive, shared explosion, a frantic, stolen release that left them both gasping for air in the harsh, sterile light. This time, there was no lingering guilt in the immediate aftermath. There was only the adrenaline of the forbidden, the intoxicating thrill of getting away with it. They were no longer two people who had made a terrible mistake. They were partners in a dangerous, exhilarating secret. The first time, they were drowning in guilt. The second time, they had learned to breathe underwater. The forbidden was no longer a poison. It had become the very air they needed to feel alive. I returned home on a Thursday evening, just as the sun was casting long, apologetic shadows across the lawn. The flight from Chicago had been turbulent, but my mind was calm, soaring with the success of the trip. The investors were pleased. The engineers were on board. The halcyon tower was rising, real and tangible, from the blueprints of my imagination. I walked through my front door carrying this sense of triumph, eager to shed the skin of the ruthless architect and melt back into the role of wife and mother. The reunion was, on the surface, everything I had hoped for. Leo ran into my arms, a whirlwind of joyful energy and stories about a trip to the park. Liam hugged me, his arms strong and familiar, and kissed me, a gesture that felt more like a welcome than the perfunctory peck I'd received on my departure. Bella was there too, smiling her gentle, deferential smile. "Welcome home, Eleanor," she said softly. "We missed you." Everything was in its perfect, prescribed place. And yet, something was profoundly wrong. The air in the house was different. It was heavier, laced with a strange, static energy, like the oppressive stillness before a violent storm. It was the silence of a secret. Liam's behavior that evening was the first discordant note in a symphony of lies. He was too attentive, too solicitous. He took my bag. He poured me a glass of my favorite wine without my asking. He followed me from room to room as I unpacked, peppering me with questions about the trip. His focus on me was absolute, intense, and utterly unnerving. This was not the comfortable, slightly distracted husband I had left 3 days ago. This was a performance. He was playing the part of the doting, devoted husband with a desperate, frantic energy, as if he was trying to convince not only me, but himself. I felt like an audience member at a one-man show, and the actor was sweating under the stage lights. I would catch his eye, and behind the forced smile, I saw a flicker of something else, a deep, haunted anxiety. He was a man overcompensating, a man trying to plaster over a gaping hole in our reality with a frantic flurry of loving gestures. It was the first time I realized that guilt has a particular cloying scent, like flowers left too long in a vase. If Liam's role was that of the overeager actor, Bella's was that of a frightened stagehand, trying to disappear into the scenery. The warm, open girl I had hired was gone. In her place was a nervous, withdrawn creature who seemed to shrink every time I entered a room. She could not meet my gaze for more than a second, her eyes constantly flitting away to a corner of the room, to the floor, anywhere but my face. When I spoke to her, asking about her time with Leo, her answers were clipped, monosyllabic. The easy camaraderie they had all shared before my trip had evaporated, replaced by a rigid, suffocating formality. She was a ghost in our midst, her presence a constant, silent scream of an alarm I could feel in my bones but could not yet intellectually comprehend. I tried to reason it away. She doesn't want to intrude on our reunion. She's giving us space. But it felt less like respectful distance and more like fearful aversion. It was the behavior of someone who knows they have trespassed, who is terrified of the rightful owner of the house discovering their tracks. The first piece of tangible evidence came to me through a sense, the most primitive and honest of them all. On my first morning back, I took a load of my travel clothes to the laundry room. As I opened the door, I was met with a strange cocktail of scents. My home has a scent, one I carefully curated: lavender, clean cotton, a hint of lemon. This was something else. It was the rich, woody aroma of Liam's expensive sandalwood cologne, a scent he only wore on special occasions, inexplicably mingled with the sweet, almost juvenile scent of Bella's coconut shampoo. The two fragrances, his and hers, were intertwined in the small, enclosed space, an olfactory signature of an intimacy that should not exist. Why would their scents be so strong, so present, in this hidden, functional room? My mind, the logical architect, scrambled for a rational explanation. He must have been in here looking for something. She does the laundry, it's nothing. But my intuition, an older and wiser part of me, knew that scents don't lie. They tell stories. And this story was one of secret, shared proximity. The clues began to accumulate, each one a small, sharp stone in my shoe. Liam's phone, which had once been a casual object left on countertops and coffee tables, was now a third limb, an extension of his body. It never left his side. It lay screened down on his nightstand while he slept. It went with him to the bathroom. I saw him texting late at night, his shoulders hunched, his body angled away from me in a posture that was both secretive and defensive. The casual intimacy of our marriage had been breached by this small, glowing rectangle, a portal to a world from which I was now excluded. Then came the credit card bill. I saw a charge for a jeweler, a modest amount for a delicate silver bracelet. It wasn't my birthday. It wasn't our anniversary. When I asked him about it, he was evasive, claiming it was a gift for his assistant's wedding, a story that fell apart with a single, polite phone call to her the next day. The lies were clumsy, amateurish, the frantic improvisations of a man unused to deception. The final, irrefutable proof came on a Sunday, while I was putting away clean laundry. A task so mundane, so routine, it was the perfect camouflage for the moment that would shatter my life. One of Leo's tiny socks fell from my hands and disappeared under the heavy oak dresser in our bedroom. I sighed, got on my hands and knees, and reached into the dusty darkness. My fingers closed not on a sock, but on a small, silky piece of fabric. I pulled it out into the light. It was a single panty. It was pale pink, trimmed with cheap, delicate lace. And it was not mine. My underwear drawer was a graveyard of sensible, comfortable cotton in shades of beige and black. This was the lingerie of a young woman, an object of hopeful, naive seduction. I held it in the palm of my hand, this tiny, damning piece of evidence. The world didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. The sun still streamed through the window. Leo was still laughing downstairs. But my world, the one I had so meticulously designed and built, had just been leveled. 1,000 rationalizations tried to storm the gates of my mind. It got mixed in the laundry. It's a mistake, but they were all weak, pathetic lies. I knew whose it was. And I knew with a certainty that left me breathless how it had gotten there. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I calmly folded the tiny piece of pink lace and buried it deep in the back of my own lingerie drawer, a secret sacrament of my husband's sin. The unraveling was complete. All the small, unsettling moments, The doubts I had so diligently suppressed now rushed back, reforming themselves into a single, monstrous tapestry of betrayal. The suspicion was no longer a whisper, it was a roar. I lay in bed that night, my body rigid, a universe of distance between me and the sleeping man beside me. I was an architect, a master of structures and foundations, lying in the ruins of my own life. And for the first time, in the heart of the home I had built, I felt utterly, completely homeless. Knowledge is a peculiar sort of burden. Before I found that piece of pink lace, my life was a masterpiece of denial, a fragile structure I held together with willful ignorance. After, my reality was rebuilt with the cold, hard materials of truth. I existed in a state of hyper-awareness, a silent, sleepless observer in my own home. I watched them. I studied them the way I would study a blueprint, learning every line of their deception, every angle of their betrayal. They had become confident in my obliviousness, my supposed absorption in my work, creating the perfect cover for their squalid little affair. They had developed their own secret language, a lexicon of stolen glances across the dinner table, a subtle pressure of his hand on her back as she passed him in the hall, a shared, secret smile when they thought I wasn't looking. Their lies were a web, spun from casual excuses and secret text messages, and they were the two spiders, growing fat and careless at its center, believing the fly was still completely unaware it was trapped. I played my part with an unnerving, cold precision. I was the oblivious, overworked wife. I would ask about their day, listen to their fabricated stories, and smile. But inside, I was a scientist, collecting data, each new lie, each secret touch, another piece of irrefutable proof. A strange, icy calm settled over me. The searing pain of the initial discovery had cooled into a hard, dense ball of fury in my gut. I felt a profound, chilling detachment, as if I were watching a film of my own life. I saw a successful, intelligent woman being made a fool of in her own home, and I felt nothing but a quiet, simmering resolve. My house, my beautiful, sterile sanctuary, was no longer a home. It was a laboratory, and I was observing two specimens indulge their most primal, reckless instincts, documenting their every move as they spiraled deeper into the intoxication of their deceit. The apex of their recklessness, the ultimate act of territorial violation, took place on the night of the annual Boston Architectural Guild fundraiser. It was a mandatory event for me, a night of schmoozing and smiling until my face ached. Liam, naturally, had an excuse. An early and critical meeting the next morning that he absolutely had to prepare for. It was a plausible, perfectly crafted lie. As I stood before the mirror in our master bathroom, applying my lipstick, I saw his reflection behind me. His eyes weren't on me, the wife in the elegant black dress. They were scanning the room, our room, with a look of possessive, anticipatory hunger. He thought I saw nothing but my own reflection. He had no idea I could see the whole sordid future of his evening playing out in the dark, predatory gleam in his eyes. My bathroom was my sanctuary, within a sanctuary. The freestanding tub, a sculptural masterpiece of white porcelain, was my throne. It was where I would soak away the stresses of my day, where I felt safest. As I left the room, I ran my hand along its cool, smooth edge, a silent, unknowing farewell to the last untainted space in my life. I have no doubt that they waited until the sound of my car's engine had completely faded down the long driveway. Then, the house was theirs. I can see him, his heart pounding with the thrill of the hunt, finding her in the kitchen. There was no pretense this time, no gentle seduction with wine and sad stories. Their addiction was now in a far more advanced stage. I imagine he simply took her by the hand, his grip firm, and led her from the public spaces of the downstairs and up the stairs, into the heart of my private world. He led her past our bed, the bed where I slept, and directly into my bathroom. This was no longer just about sex. This was about conquest. It was about possessing and defiling the very center of my life, proving to themselves that they could. I see them standing there, surrounded by my things, my perfumes on the vanity, my silk robe on its hook, the bath oils I loved. The air would have been thick with my scent, an irony that must have only heightened their arousal. He pushed her back against the cool marble of the vanity, his kiss brutal, hungry, a kiss that was not meant to entice but to own. And she, no longer the hesitant, frightened girl, met his hunger with her own. This was not the frantic, guilty coupling on the sofa, nor the risky, rushed act in the laundry room. This was a slow, deliberate desecration. He unzipped my dress for her, I'm sure, letting the expensive fabric pool at her feet. Then, he lifted her and placed her inside my bathtub, the empty, cold porcelain basin. A makeshift altar for their profane worship. I can hear the sounds in my mind, amplified by the cold, hard surfaces of the room. The slap of their skin, their ragged, uncontrolled breaths echoing off the tile. I can hear his voice, a low, guttural growl, no longer whispering. You love this, don't you? Being here, in her bathroom, in her tub, my secret little whore. And I can hear her answer, not in words, but in a long, shuddering moan of assent as she pulled him down to her. Harder, Liam, I hear her begging, her voice raw with a lust that has burned away all shame. Go deeper. Yes, right there. Make me scream your name. The architect in me, the part that understands structures, reconstructs the scene with horrifying detail. I can visualize his body moving inside of hers, the mechanics of their passion, the raw friction of their bodies in the cold, sterile tub. I imagine the sight of her blonde hair stark against the white porcelain, her legs wrapped around his waist, her face a mask of pure animalistic pleasure, and him above her, a conqueror in his stolen kingdom. Their climax would have been a loud, shared scream of release, a sound of such unrestrained passion that they would have heard it downstairs, had they cared to listen. But they didn't care. They believed they were invincible, safe in the soundproof fortress of my ignorance. I came home early. The speeches were dull, the forced pleasantries suffocating. A headache was pounding behind my eyes, and a deeper, more primal anxiety was churning in my stomach. The house was dark and silent as I let myself in. Too silent. I walked up the stairs, my heels sinking into the plush runner. The door to our bedroom, which I always left ajar, was closed. I stood before it, my hand hovering over the cold metal of the doorknob. I could hear nothing at first. And then, a small sound. A whisper, the rustle of fabric, the soft click of a belt buckle. I didn't need to open the door. I didn't need to see them. I could smell it, a scent seeping through the cracks around the door frame, the musky, salty scent of their sex, a scent that had now irrevocably tainted the air of my most private space. I stood there, a stranger at my own bedroom door, listening to the quiet sounds of my life being erased. The performance was over. All that was left was the confrontation. Standing outside my own bedroom door, listening to the quiet aftermath of my husband's passion with another woman, I felt the last vestiges of the wife I used to be wither and die. The grief was still there, a vast black ocean inside me, but something else was born in that moment, a cold, hard, architectural resolve. I needed proof. My intuition, my senses, the damning piece of pink lace buried in my drawer, they were enough for me, but they were not enough for the world. They were not enough to prevent Liam from weaving a tapestry of lies, from painting me as the hysterical, paranoid wife. I am a woman who builds things on unshakable foundations. Before I could demolish the life we had built, I needed proof that was as solid and irrefutable as concrete and steel. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The next day, I bought a camera. It was a small, innocuous-looking device, disguised as a digital clock, the kind of gadget sold for a world of sordid domestic espionage I never imagined I would inhabit. Buying it felt like a profound personal failure, a surrender to the ugliest version of myself. I told Liam it was a new smart home device, something to let us check in on Leo from our phones. He barely looked up from his laptop, his mind already on how to orchestrate his next stolen moment with Bella, and simply nodded. Great idea, honey. The ease with which he accepted the lie was a fresh twist of the knife. I placed the clock on the mantelpiece in the living room, its tiny, all-seeing eye perfectly positioned to capture the heart of our home. I felt a wave of nausea. I had just bugged my own life. I had turned my sanctuary into a surveillance state. For 3 days, I became a voyeur of my own slow-motion destruction. Each night, After Liam was asleep, I would retreat to my study, put on my headphones, and watch the footage. The camera did not capture the grand, dramatic scenes of passion I had half expected. Instead, it captured the 1,000 tiny paper cuts of their ongoing affair. I watched them in time-lapsed evidence. The way his hand would find the small of her back as she reached for something in the kitchen, the lingering glances when they thought no one could see, the hushed, intimate conversations on the sofa after Leo was in bed. I watched them move through my home with the easy, unconscious familiarity of lovers, their bodies orbiting each other in a secret gravitational pull. It was all there, the texture of their betrayal, but it was circumstantial. It was enough to break my heart 1,000 times over, but it was not the single, undeniable act I needed. It was not the smoking gun. On the 4th day, I found it, but it was not what I was looking for. I was watching the footage from that afternoon while I was at a client meeting across town. The living room was empty, bathed in the quiet, dusty light of late afternoon. Then Bella walked into the frame. She checked the hallway, looked towards the stairs, and, believing she was completely alone, pulled out her phone. I leaned closer to my monitor, turning up the volume, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat. I watched her speak, and through the small, tinny speaker of my laptop, I heard the words that would change everything. "I know, Clara. I know," Bella said, her voice tight with an agitation I had never heard from her before. She paced back and forth in front of my fireplace. "I know that was the plan, but it's not that simple anymore." A pause as she listened to the person on the other end. "Of course I remember what he did to you," she snapped. "How could I forget? Seeing you like that, it's the whole reason I'm here, isn't it?" My blood went cold. "Plan? Reason I'm here?" The camera kept recording. "No, he has no idea who I am," Bella continued, her voice dropping. "He just sees me, the girl who takes care of his son." Another long pause. Her next words were a choked, broken whisper. It was supposed to be about making him pay. It was about destroying his perfect life, making her pay for living the life you were supposed to have. But I'm sleeping with him, Clara. The confession hung in the air, a poisoned cloud. She sank onto the sofa, my sofa, her head in her hands. "Yes, I know what that means," she sobbed into the phone. "It means I've lost control. It means I'm just as weak as he is." I stopped the recording, my hand trembling. Clara. The name was a faint, distant bell, a name from a past that wasn't mine. I scrambled for the key to this new, horrific puzzle. I left my study and went to the one place I knew held the archives of Liam's life before me, a set of dusty storage boxes in the attic. I tore through them, my hands covered in dust, my heart pounding with a terrible, frantic energy. I found what I was looking for in a worn shoebox filled with old photographs. There he was, a younger Liam, maybe 25, with his arm around a beautiful, dark-haired woman. They were on a beach, smiling, incandescently happy. I turned the photo over. The back read, in faded blue ink, "Liam and Clara, Cape Cod, summer 2008. I stared at the woman's face. The smile, the dark hair, it was all unfamiliar. But her eyes, I knew those eyes. They were the same large, expressive hazel eyes that I saw every single day in my own home. They were Bella's eyes. And in that dusty, suffocating attic, the final, cruelest piece of the puzzle slammed into place. This was not a random affair. This was not a simple story of a weak man and a young, tempting nanny. This was an assassination, a targeted, meticulously planned infiltration. Bella's arrival at our door was not a coincidence delivered by a hiring agency. It was the first move in a calculated act of war. She was a Trojan horse, sent by a ghost from my husband's past, to burn my life to the ground, as revenge for a wound I never knew had been inflicted. The betrayal was so much deeper, so much more venomous than I could ever have imagined. It wasn't just about my husband's lust. It was about a premeditated, malicious campaign engineered to destroy me. I walked back down the attic stairs, the old photograph clutched in my hand. The grief, the pain, the heartbreak, they were all still there, a churning sea inside me. But now, they were joined by a new, terrible power, the power of the absolute, unvarnished truth. The camera had not given me the proof of adultery I had been seeking. It had given me something infinitely more devastating and infinitely more useful. It had given me the motive. The girl in the photograph was a ghost from a life I never knew, but her cousin, the girl sleeping in my guest room, was very real. And as I stood there in the hallway, the silent house breathing around me, I finally understood. I wasn't just fighting an affair. I was fighting a war that had been declared on me long before I ever knew it had begun. And now, I was finally ready to fight back. The confrontation was not a storm, it was a controlled demolition. For 2 days after discovering the truth about Clara, I moved through my house like a ghost, my mind a silent, whirring engine of calculation. I was no longer a wife consumed by grief. I was an architect, drafting the blueprints for a final, terrible structure. There would be no screaming, no throwing of plates, no tearful accusations. Their betrayal was a disease, and it required the cold, precise incision of a surgeon's scalpel, not the messy, passionate blows of a lover's rage. I chose my moment, Sunday evening, a time that was once sacred to us, reserved for family dinners and the quiet winding down of the weekend. The air was still, the house settled, the calm before I unleashed the hurricane. I set the stage in the living room, the grand, open space that had always been the centerpiece of our public-facing perfection. I took the small, black clock, the camera, my silent witness, and placed it in the very center of the coffee table. Next to it, I laid the old, faded photograph of Liam and Clara, face down. These were my exhibits, the only 2 pieces of evidence I would need. Then, I sent the summons. A simple text to Liam, who was in his study, feigning work. A soft knock on Bella's bedroom door. "Could you both join me in the living room for a moment?" My voice was calm, neutral, devoid of any emotion. It was this chilling placidity, I think, that frightened them the most. They walked in and sat together on the white sofa opposite me, their bodies close but not touching, a united, nervous front. They looked like 2 defendants entering a courtroom, bracing themselves for the prosecution. They thought they knew what the trial was about. They were wrong. I let the silence stretch, allowing the weight of it to press down on them. Liam shifted uncomfortably. Bella stared at her hands, twisting them in her lap. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and even. "I think it's time we stopped keeping secrets in this house." I watched their faces. Liam's jaw tightened. Bella flinched. They were preparing their denials, their fabricated stories to counter my accusations of their affair. I didn't give them the chance to use them. I reached forward, my hand steady, and slowly turned the photograph on the table face up. I pushed it across the polished wood towards them. It slid to a stop directly in front of Liam. Before we discussed the present, I said, my voice as cold and smooth as the marble floor, "I want to talk about the past. Liam, tell me who this is." The effect was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if I had detonated a silent bomb in the room. Liam stared at the photograph of his younger, happier self with a woman who was not me, and all the color drained from his face. He looked utterly, completely stunned, his prepared defenses for a fight about infidelity rendered instantly obsolete. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Bella glanced at the picture, and a small, choked gasp escaped her lips. Her eyes darted from the photograph to Liam, to me, her face a mask of pure panic. I didn't let him recover. I turned my gaze to her, my eyes locking onto hers, pinning her in place. "And you, Bella," I continued in that same terrifyingly calm voice. "You can help him if he can't remember. You know her, don't you? You spoke about her on the phone last Thursday. You said her name, Clara." Then I gestured to the clock on the table. "You should be more careful. Some clocks record more than just time." That was it, checkmate. The entire foundation of their secret world crumbled in that single moment. Liam looked from the clock to Bella, his expression shifting from shock to a dawning, sickening horror as he finally understood. He was not just looking at his nanny. He was looking at the instrument of a decade-old revenge he never knew was coming. Bella simply broke. The facade of the innocent, conflicted girl dissolved into the raw, ugly truth of the failed conspirator. A sob tore from her throat, and she buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with gut-wrenching despair. Their affair, the secret that had felt so monumental just moments before, was now just a sordid little footnote to a much larger, darker story. Now, and only now, did I allow the affair into the room. "So tell me," I asked, my voice laced with a contempt so profound it felt like acid on my tongue. "Was sleeping with him part of the original plan, Bella? Or was that just an unexpected bonus for you? A little perk of the job while you were busy avenging your cousin?" I turned to Liam, who was staring at Bella with a look of utter betrayal, the irony of which was almost laughable. "And you, Liam, my husband, were you ever even seeing her? Or was this whole pathetic drama just you trying to fuck the ghost of a woman you screwed over 15 years ago? Tell me. I really want to know what this was all for." The dam of their silence broke, and the ugly, polluted truth came flooding out. The excuses were pathetic. Liam stammered about his loneliness, about feeling unseen, about how Bella had just listened. Bella, through her sobs, confessed everything the plan, born from years of watching her cousin Clara live a life shadowed by a broken heart. The intention to just get the job, to be a subtle poison in our perfect lives. The shock of her own, real feelings of lust, and a twisted sort of affection for the man she was supposed to destroy. They were no longer lovers, no longer partners in crime. They were two weak, desperate individuals, stripped bare and exposed in the harsh light of a truth they could no longer escape. I listened to it all, every pathetic justification, every tearful confession. I felt nothing. The part of me that could feel pain for them was already dead. When they had finally exhausted themselves into a sniveling, silent heap of shame, I delivered my verdict. "Bella," I said, and she flinched at the sound of her name. "Pack your bags. I want you and every trace of you out of this house in 1 hour. The life you came here to destroy is none of your concern anymore." I then turned to the broken man who was my husband. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading, desperate for a lifeline. I gave him none. "I don't know who you are," I said, and the truth of that statement was the most painful thing of all. The man I married, the man I built this life with, would not be this stupid, this weak, this utterly blind. You didn't just have an affair, Liam. You were so consumed with your own self-pity that you failed to see you were being hunted in your own home. You let a war in through the front door and you were too busy enjoying the attention to even notice. He began to cry, to beg, to promise he could fix it, but his words were meaningless. "Get out," I said, my voice a whisper, but with the force of a command. "Go to a hotel. I need to be alone in what's left of this house." He finally stumbled to his feet and left, a stranger walking out of my life. I sat there, alone, in the center of my perfect, silent living room. The photograph of a smiling ghost and a digital clock were my only companions. I had won. I had exposed the truth and banished the traitors. But as I sat there in the deafening silence of my beautiful, empty house, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was the war's only real casualty. It has been 6 months since the war. The house is quieter than it has ever been, and the silence is a physical entity, a heavy blanket that smothers all sound. Liam is gone. His clothes, his books, his scent, all systematically erased, leaving behind empty drawers and vacant shelves. Bella vanished that same night, a ghost dissolved into the darkness, leaving only a single pink lace panty buried in my drawer like a tiny, malignant tumor. The divorce papers sit in a neat clinical stack on my desk in the study. Our passionate, ugly human drama has been reduced to a series of clauses and stipulations, a legal document that formally condemns a structure that had been rotting from the inside for years. I won. I have the house. I have my son. I have the truth. And I am utterly, profoundly alone. In the dead of night, when the city is asleep and my work is done, I find myself wandering through these rooms. I have become the curator of a museum dedicated to my own dead marriage. I walk into the living room and stand before the vast white sofa. It's just an object, a collection of wood, fabric, and foam. But in my mind's eye, it is forever a crime scene, the stage for their first, desperate act of betrayal. I can almost smell the stale wine and the scent of their guilt. I move on, past the laundry room, a small, functional space that now holds the memory of a rougher, more confident lust, a place where their secret graduated from a mistake into an addiction. And then, I stand at the threshold of my bathroom, my sanctuary. I look at the freestanding tub, a beautiful, sculptural vessel of white porcelain. It is here that they performed their most brazen act of desecration, their bodies entwined in my most private space. I used to see it as a symbol of peace and luxury. Now, it is an empty sarcophagus. The anger, that white-hot, righteous fury that fueled me through the confrontation, has burned itself out. It has left behind not peace, but a vast, empty landscape of sorrowful clarity. And in this clarity, I am forced to confront a truth more painful than the affair itself: my own complicity. I was not an innocent bystander in the decay of my own marriage. I was an active participant. As I wander these empty rooms, I see my own ghost everywhere. I see her hunched over blueprints at the dining room table, ignoring her husband's attempts at conversation. I see her answering emails on her phone while her son is trying to show her a drawing. I see her choosing the cold, clean lines of her ambition over the messy, complicated, and warm reality of her own family. Liam's affair with Bella was a betrayal, but my affair was with a building of glass and steel. I gave my passion, my devotion, and my late-night whispers to the Halcyon Tower. I poured my soul into creating a legacy for the world, and in doing so, I allowed the home I was supposed to be building for my family to fall into ruin. I created a perfect, beautiful, empty stage, and then I acted surprised when two lonely, damaged actors wandered onto it, desperate to feel the warmth of a spotlight. Any spotlight. Liam's weakness and Bella's malice were the weapons, but it was my neglect that loaded the gun. This realization offers no comfort. It is not an absolution for them, but a life sentence of regret for myself. It is one thing to be the victim of a betrayal. It is another thing entirely to know you helped build the scaffold for your own execution. In the end, it is not the images that haunt me most. I can, with effort, banish the picture of their bodies entwined on my sofa or in my tub. The mind, in an act of self-preservation, can blur the sharpest edges of visual memory, but I cannot banish the sound. Lying here, in the center of my king-sized bed that now feels as vast and empty as a desert, the silence of the house presses in on me. And in that silence, my mind manufactures the one thing it can't forget. It's the sound from the very beginning. The soft, suppressed, breathy moan of forbidden pleasure, a sound of a secret, the sound of a joy that was not mine, happening in a place that was. That imagined sound is the true ghost in this house. It was the sound that first murdered the peaceful silence of my ignorance, and it is the sound that now defines the heavy, eternal silence of my knowledge. I don't know what the future holds. The divorce will be finalized. The seasons will change. Perhaps one day I will sell this house, this beautiful, hollow monument, to a life that no longer exists. Perhaps one day I will be able to trust someone again. But I don't know. The damage feels too structural, too foundational. I am an architect. I design things that are meant to stand, to endure, to provide shelter. But I now live in the silent, invisible ruins of a life of my own design. And I know, with a certainty, that chills me to the bone, that some structures, once they are broken this completely, can never truly be rebuilt.